Thanks a lot, Nick. It's good to be in the great state of Victoria, noting, of course, that it was founded by people from the even greater state of Tasmania. But I understand the Australian Electoral Commission is now expunging their names from the names of electorates in Victoria. Just a little bit of housekeeping, and Stuart Wood's laughing. I'm not sure the Tas on our little symbol is sufficiently big enough, but one of the endearing features about the map, of course, is that the ACT does not appear at all. So it's a privilege to be associated with this society from its inception, and so to Gary Johns, who I think has quite wisely slept in this morning. I know he's just arrived right on time, doing a Bronwyn Bishop, I think, walking in right on time to be recognised. So can I thank Gary Johns? Can I thank Gary Johns for his recognition yesterday? And I think I'm in the category of still emerging. The Society's founding president, Sir Harry Gibbs, was a truly great Australian, and as a Tasmanian and a Federalist, I've long been inspired by Sir Harry's famous dissenting judgment in the 1983 Tasmanian Dams case. As an aside, Bob Brown's alternative to hydropower was, you've guessed it, a coal-fired power station. But that's an aside. The Tasmanian Dams was one of the most detrimentally significant turning points in the history of my home state of Tasmania, if only that 4-3 decision would have been the other way round. It was in this context that I read with great interest the details of this year's essay competition sponsored by the Society, which asked for essays on the topic of which decision of the High Court of Australia in the field of federalism do you regard as wrongly decided and why? Needless to say, I thought, here's a go, especially when I saw that there was a generous cash prize on offer. As I began getting my pens out and dusting off some old textbooks, I read the fine print and realised I may, in fact, be too old to enter. And given that I've now been in the Senate for 25 years, thank you for reminding everybody, I probably couldn't pass myself off as being under 35. But being both woke and innovative, I protested that I was age fluid, but to no avail. So instead, the Society has offered me the podium this morning. I've chosen the title of the paper as a tribute to Sir Harry, who in the earlier years of the Society delivered several typically erudite papers on topical constitutional matters such as A Republic, the Issues, which was to the 8th Conference, and to the 11th Conference, a preamble, the Issues. In the first of these papers, Sir Harry began by saying, I remain unconvinced that the Constitution of Australia would be made more democratic, efficient or just by breaking the existing links with the Crown. However, this is not the occasion to press arguments of that kind. My present purpose is to discuss what issues would have to be decided before our Constitution could be converted. It is in this spirit that I approach the subject of a proposed Indigenous voice to the Commonwealth Parliament, and in so doing, highlight some of the many issues that will need to be addressed if this proposal is to be progressed further, let alone succeed at a referendum. In so doing, there are 3 key issues I wish to traverse. The first is to offer some reflections on the concept of Indigenous reconciliation. What does it actually mean? What has it meant? And what may be the implications of an Indigenous voice? Second, I'll continue outline some of the issues relating to the details of the proposed voice, or more precisely, the current lack of details. And finally, I'll offer some hard-headed and pragmatic views on the prospects of success for the voice at a referendum. Given time, I won't touch on the issue of and desirability of identity politics and having a separate class of citizenry in our Constitution. First, reconciliation. In considering the debate around a voice, it is important to recognise its origins, which means going back to the concept of Aboriginal reconciliation, which has been a topical issue for some 3 decades. Reconciliation begat constitutional recognition, which, according to its advocates, became necessary to achieve reconciliation in its desired form. Recognition, in turn, begat the voice, which, according to its advocates, is now the only way to achieve recognition in a form acceptable to Indigenous Australians. Reconciliation is a bit like motherhood. It's highly desirable, but can mean many things to many people. The New Shorter Oxford Dictionary tells us that reconciliation is the action or act of reconciling a person to oneself or another, or estranged parties to one another, the fact or condition of being reconciled, harmony, concord. In the context of the current debate, I think it is timely to illustrate 2 approaches to reconciliation and constitutional recognition. The first was articulated by Nelson Mandela, who said, "Take your guns, your knives and your pangas and throw them into the sea. If you are negotiating, you must do so in a spirit of reconciliation, not from the point of view of issuing ultimatums." An alternate and rather different approach was articulated earlier this month by Indigenous leader Galaway Yunupingu when he made what he describes as a final demand for substantive constitutional change, threatening that the Yolngu people of Arnhem Land will throw the Constitution into the sea if change does not come soon. The quest for reconciliation has a long history. The Council for Aboriginal Reconciliation Act 1991 was based on the objective of reconciliation by the centenary of Federation 10 years later. Its legislation empowered the Council to, and I quote, consult Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders and the wider Australian community on whether reconciliation would be advanced by a formal document or documents of reconciliation. There was no suggestion that such a document should have constitutional status. The Council was replaced in 2001 by Reconciliation Australia, which still exists today. On its website are a number of helpful links, including one entitled, "What is Reconciliation?" Sadly, at the time of writing, the link was broken, so I was not able to inform myself as to how Reconciliation Australia currently defines the concept. Reconciliation in Australia has at various times meant various things. It can be a temporal concept with what we would now term a hard deadline, or it can be an ongoing and presumably indefinite process of living together in greater harmony. It can mean the achievement of specified goals, such as closing the gap on quantifiable social and economic measures, or it can be measured in less tangible ways. It can be symbolic, practical, or a combination of the two. In 1991, it was felt that reconciliation could be achieved through a non-constitutional document. By 1991, discussion had moved beyond this to the concept of constitutional recognition. Indeed, a referendum was held to amend the preamble to include a modest statement of recognition. Prime Minister Howard described it as, quote, "a fair attempt to say what everybody wants to say." Notwithstanding the defeat of this proposal, since 1999, proposals for constitutional recognition have become more ambitious to now include a voice, and the concept of what is required to achieve reconciliation has also become more expansive. The Uluru Statement from the Heart states that Makarrata is the culmination of our agenda, and that this ought to include agreement making, commonly understood as treaties, the recognition of First Nation sovereignty and self-determination, all of which is now presumably the new yardstick for the achievement of reconciliation. Let's turn to the details. The most important issue to consider in relation to the proposed voice is that of the details of how would it actually look and function in practice. So far, no advocates of a voice have, to my knowledge, put forward with specificity details about how such a body would be constituted or made any attempt to outline what its powers or procedures might be. It's over 2 years since the release of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, first proposing the voice, and still no details have emerged. In the interests of discussion, I simply put forward a range of practical questions to ponder for any such voice and how it will be constituted and how it will function. Firstly, if such a body was to exist, who would be eligible to be a member of it? How would indigeneity be defined? In the event of any disputes, who would be the arbiter? Secondly, would its jurisdiction be limited to simply Indigenous issues, or would it also have a say on broader national issues? Will it be elected or appointed? If the former, who gets to nominate for election and who gets to vote? If the latter, who does the appointing? What are the qualifications to be appointed, and what will the term of appointment be? If elected, what will be the constituencies, electorates, states, regions, relevant First Nations, or something else? If elected, will parties or other organised groupings endorse candidates with particular platforms? Will public funding be provided, as in parliamentary elections? Where will it meet? How often and on what terms? Will its members be paid like parliamentarians? Will they be free to hold dual citizenship or office of profit under the Crown? How will potential conflicts of interest be dealt with? Will they also be entitled to paid staff, most importantly Comcars, and travel allowances, whilst on official business? These questions relate only to the establishment of the voice. There are a range of equally important questions that will need to be addressed in relation to its operation. In raising these questions, I want to borrow the approach used by Chief Justice French in his presentation to the Society's 29th conference by starting with an anodyne statement of the blindingly obvious. Namely, Indigenous Australians are a very diverse people with a range of views on a range of issues who are unlikely to adopt a monolithic consensus position on any given matter. On this basis, we should ask the proponents of the voice, what will the procedures be for debate and voting within the voice on particular questions? Will there be caucuses and whips to manage such debates and do the numbers? Will the voice appoint one of its members as the prime voice to speak on its behalf? Will other members be allocated particular portfolios on which they will speak, the voice ministry? In the event of disagreement, will there be scope within the voice for Her Majesty's loyal opposition voice? If the voice cannot reach a consensus in its advice to Parliament, what form, if any, will such advice then take? Will the Parliament receive a majority voice report and potentially multiple dissenting voice reports? If so, what, if anything, would the Parliament be expected to do? If the voice cannot reach a view on a particular issue in a timely manner, or not at all, because opinion is divided, what should the Parliament do? Will the voice only consider issues before the Parliament in response to proposals put to the Parliament, or will it have the ability to put own motion proposals to the Parliament? In either case, what checks and balances, if any, will exist to stop the system being gamed by members of Parliament who refer matters to the voice which have no realistic prospect of being enacted by the Parliament or by members of the voice itself in proposing measures that the government of the day would clearly not support? Let's have a look at the prospect of success. Finally, having flagged these real live issues, I turn to make some observations on the prospects of success at a referendum for either recognition or the voice. We are now in the 46th Commonwealth Parliament. By my reckoning, every parliament since the 39th, bar one, has entertained the idea of recognition. The 39th passed legislation to provide for a referendum to amend the preamble to the Constitution. the 41st Parliament. In the 41st Parliament, Prime Minister Howard took a proposal to the 2007 election to put to a referendum Indigenous recognition in the event he was re-elected. In each subsequent Parliament, the issue has re-emerged. Now in the 46th Parliament, Prime Minister Morrison and Minister for Indigenous Australians Ken Wyatt have committed to putting a referendum on recognition during the life of the Parliament, which may not include a constitutionally entrenched voice. Instead, they have floated the possibility of a legislated voice. During this time, there have been 4 specially constituted bodies to progress the issue and design a model for constitutional recognition. Following the 2010 election, Prime Minister Gillard established an expert panel on constitutional recognition. The expert panel delivered its report in January 2012. In November 2012, the 43rd Parliament established a joint select committee on constitutional recognition to consider the issues that remained unresolved following the expert panel process, and in December 2013, the 44th Parliament resolved to continue that committee. The Joint Select Committee delivered its final report on the 25th of June 2015. Lots of committees, lots of reports. In December 2015, the Australian Government established a bipartisan 16-member referendum council, a second expert panel by another name, to consult widely and take steps to achieve constitutional recognition. The Referendum Council released a discussion paper in October 2016 and delivered a final report to the Prime Minister in mid-2017. The proposal for a voice emerged from this final report. In response, the Turnbull Government established a second Joint Select Committee to consult on the design of a voice. It delivered its report in late 2018. In less than a decade, we have seen 2 expert committees and 2 Joint Select Committees attempt to design an achievable model for recognition, yet we are no closer to having one. In fact, with each succeeding panel or committee report, we seem to have moved further away. The most recent of these reports from the second Joint Select Committee included some observations on how the discussion has drifted to ever more expansive proposals stating that, quote, the Uluru Statement from the Heart changed the direction of the debate on constitutional recognition, and the debate about the form of recognition has widened to include local and regional voice proposals. The report also concluded, using some diplomatic language, and I quote again, in its interim report, the committee suggested that addressing questions of details would assist in the development of a proposal. Quite a startling revelation. They went on, the committee sought further evidence from stakeholders, outlining a series of approximately 100 questions, which makes my attempt look pretty small, but they put forward approximately 100 questions in relation to the design and implementation of local, regional and national voices. Let me quote from their report again. Listen very carefully. Very few submissions took the time to respond to the questions raised. In other words, nobody wanted to deal with the actual detail. The committee therefore recommended a further process of co-design to consider national, regional and local elements of the voice. Finally, it's worth stepping through the process that would need to be traversed for any referendum proposal to succeed. There are 2 conditions that are required for any successful referendum to be put in the first place. One assumes a degree of public impetus. Secondly, an executive government that considers the issue important enough to warrant pursuing and which believes that such a change has some prospect of success. Then there are 5 necessary conditions for it to succeed. A specific proposal endorsed by the executive, which in turn can attract the support of a majority of the House of Representatives, which in turn attracts the support of a majority in the Senate, which then in turn attracts a majority of voters in Australia in a majority of the states. In this case, the history of this debate since the 39th Parliament shows that the first precedent has been satisfied for some time, but however, that's the easy bit. The difficulties in satisfying the second condition should not be underestimated. Of the 7 proposals floated in the last 8 parliaments, only one achieved the first 2 conditions, namely the one in 1999. The others did not even get to first base. Under Prime Ministers Gillard, Abbott and Turnbull, serious attempts were made to initiate processes to come up with a model for recognition that could attract widespread support. In each case they failed because it was clear that the government of the day did not have confidence it could proceed with a model likely to be supported at a referendum. Even if a government was sufficiently confident and introduced legislation under Section 128, there is no guarantee that it would even pass the Parliament. First, under a coalition government, each coalition party would undertake its own separate processes of evaluation to determine whether it could support a specific proposal. There is no guarantee they each would. In the past 25 years, there have been 3 bills to amend the Constitution that were put to the Parliament. For the first 2 in 1999, coalition MPs and senators had a free vote. In the third, in 2013, a number of coalition MPs exercised the right bequeathed by the parties to cross the floor on significant matters and oppose the bill, notwithstanding the official position of their parties. On this basis, and given the numbers in the House, it is not assured that the executive government could even get a bill as far as the Senate. This is especially the case when the opposition's most recent position is the constitutional recognition must include a constitutionally entrenched voice, or else. Given this reality, let alone the challenges of securing anything close to consensus in the Senate, then a majority of voters in a majority of states, no one who supports a voice should be under any illusions about the size of the challenge they face. One could also add that at any point in the 4-stage process outlined above, when it comes to securing consensus or even a bare majority, the argument that, well, Qantas, BHP and the AFL all think it's a good idea is hardly going to be very effective. So in conclusion, advocates of a voice to Parliament need to be clear on what they are ultimately seeking from a voice. Is it to bring Australians closer together regardless of race, or is it seen as desirable to have a permanent separate structure for one race? When we speak of reconciliation, does it now mean using the voice as a vehicle to achieve treaties and sovereignty? As John Farnham once said, and I won't sing it, don't worry, "You're the voice, try to understand it." I am very confident that the Australian people won't vote for a voice they don't understand. The onus is on its advocates to fully explain what it all means to their fellow Australians. In terms of devising the basic necessary details of the proposed voice and achieving sufficient public confidence for it to succeed at a referendum, I would estimate that, thus far, barely 1%, if that, of the work that will need to be done has actually been done. And finally, will the advocates of the voice be able to persuade practical Australians exactly how the voice will lead to better outcomes in social, economic, health, housing, employment and education indicators for those Australians for which it purports to speak? What we need are less statements from the heart and more details from the head. Thank you very much.